Hey there, Wasteland Wanderer. Before we dive into one of the most terrifying tales the post-apocalyptic world has ever known, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, you're going to want to hear every dark secret I'm about to share with you tonight. Picture this. A lone scientist, hands trembling, stares through reinforced glass at something that should not exist. Behind that barrier, a creature 10 feet tall, muscles rippling beneath leathery hide, horns crowning a skull built for devastation. Its eyes, those terrible amber eyes, locked onto him with an intelligence that made his blood run cold. This was not supposed to happen. The enhancement serum was meant to make them obedient, controllable, useful. Instead, it did something far worse. It made them aware. But let me take you back further, to a military laboratory buried deep beneath the Mojave Desert, years before the bombs fell. A general stands before a presentation screen, watching footage of a massive reptilian creature tearing through a simulated battlefield. Tanks crumple like tin cans. Soldiers scatter like leaves in a hurricane. The room erupts in applause. One scientist in the back row does not clap. He knows what they've created. He knows they've opened a door that can never be closed. He knows that in their hubris, in their desperate race to create the perfect weapon, they've engineered something that might outlive humanity itself. Fast forward to the Wasteland, 2 centuries after the nuclear fire. A young scavenger enters what she thinks is an abandoned quarry. The sun beats down on broken stone and twisted metal. Everything is silent. Too silent. She takes another step, and that's when she hears it. A low rumble, like distant thunder, but it's not coming from the sky. It's coming from below, from the darkness of a cave she hadn't noticed. Her Pip-Boy's Geiger counter begins to click, but that's not what makes her freeze. It's the sound of claws, each one as long as her forearm, scraping against stone. Getting closer. She runs, but she already knows the truth. In the Wasteland, there is no apex predator more terrifying, more unstoppable, more perfectly designed to kill than what's emerging from that cave. These creatures weren't born from radiation. They weren't some random mutation of the nuclear apocalypse. No, the truth is so much worse than that. They were made, deliberately crafted in laboratories, by the best minds humanity had to offer. Created with purpose. Designed with precision. And now, they rule the Wasteland with claws that can tear through power armor and strength that makes super mutants look weak. But here's what keeps me up at night. What should terrify every survivor scratching out an existence in this dead world? The story doesn't end with their creation. It doesn't end with their escape. Because after the bombs fell, someone found them. Someone continued the experiments. Someone looked at these killing machines and thought, what if we make them smarter? What if we give them the ability to think, to plan, to speak? What happens when the perfect predator gains a human mind? That question would be answered in ways that would shake the very foundations of what it means to be human in the post-apocalyptic world. Communities would fall. Alliances would form in places no one expected. And in a small vault, far from prying eyes, a society would bloom that challenged everything we thought we knew about monsters and men. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the complete story. From the sterile laboratories of the old world to the blood-soaked quarries of the new. From classified military projects to desperate enclave experiments. From mindless beasts to creatures that could look you in the eye and ask you why. This is the entire history of the Wasteland's most feared predator. This is the story of how humanity created its own replacement. This is the lore of the Deathclaws. And I promise you, by the time we're done, you'll never look at those claw marks on a rusted car the same way again. You'll understand why even the Brotherhood of Steel thinks twice before entering their territory. You'll know the truth about what happened in Vault 13, and why the Enclave tried so desperately to bury it. So settle in grab your Nuka-Cola, and whatever you do, don't think about the sounds you might hear outside your shelter tonight. Because once you know their story, once you understand what they are and what they were meant to become, every shadow in the wasteland, it's a little bit darker. The Geiger counter clicks. The wind howls through broken buildings. And somewhere in the distance, something roars. Let's begin. The wasteland stretches before you like a wound that never healed. 200 years after the bombs fell, and the scars are still fresh, still bleeding. From the sun-baked expanses of the Mojave to the irradiated ruins of the capital wasteland, from the Commonwealth's crumbling metropolis to the savage wilderness of Appalachia, one truth remains constant. Humanity is no longer alone at the top of the food chain. You are a researcher, a seeker of pre-war truths in a world that's forgotten most of them. Some call you reckless. Others call you obsessed. You prefer the term thorough. For 3 years now, you've been piecing together fragments of a story that most wastelanders only know through screams in the night and claw marks on vault doors. The story of the Deathclaws dot your shelter is a converted pre-war bunker on the outskirts of what used to be called Nevada. The walls are covered with maps, each one marked with red dots representing confirmed Deathclaw sightings. Quarry Junction, Deathclaw Sanctuary, Dead Wind Cavern, the Glowing Sea. Each location tells part of the story, but the full picture has always remained frustratingly out of reach. Until 3 weeks ago, when you found the HOLO tape dot was buried in the ruins of a bombed-out military installation, hidden inside a safe that had somehow survived the nuclear fire. The holotape was labeled simply Project Deathclaw, and the voice on it belonged to a man who sounded like he hadn't slept in days. His words were fragmented, panicked, but the implications were clear. The Deathclaws weren't an accident of the wasteland. They were intentional. They were designed. And the project went far deeper than anyone suspected. That's when you knew you couldn't do this alone. The first person you contacted was Paladin scribe Marcus Webb of the Brotherhood of Steel. He's in his late 40s, with gray creeping into his beard and eyes that have seen too many battles. The Brotherhood has been cataloging pre-war bioweapon projects for decades, and if anyone has access to classified military records, it's them. Webb agreed to help, but only on one condition. Whatever you discover, the Brotherhood gets a copy. Knowledge like this, he said, is too dangerous to leave in civilian hands. You meet him at your bunker 3 days after the initial contact. He arrives in partial power armor, the Brotherhood insignia gleaming on his shoulder. He's carrying a heavy datapad loaded with files that make your eyes widen. Mariposa Military Base, FEV research logs, Enclave communications. This is the kind of information people kill for. In the Wasteland.web sets the datapad on your workbench with a heavy thunk. His voice is gravelly, worn down by years of shouting orders over gunfire. You know what you're digging into, right? He asks. These things aren't just animals. They're weapons. Weapons that got loose and learned to survive. The Brotherhood has lost good soldiers to them. Hell, we've lost entire squads. He pulls out a photograph, creased and faded. It shows a group of Brotherhood knights in full armor, standing victorious over a dead Deathclaw. Webb points to one of the figures. That was my brother. 2 days after this picture was taken, his squad encountered a pack of them in the capital wasteland. Only one knight survived. Said the Deathclaws worked together, communicated somehow, set up an ambush. That's not normal animal behavior. The second companion arrives shortly after. Her name is Vera Chun, and she's a ghoul. Not just any ghoul, but one who was alive before the Great War. She's one of the rare ones whose mind stayed intact through 2 centuries of radiation exposure. Her skin has the characteristic texture of necrosis, her eyes sunken but sharp. She moves with the careful precision of someone who's learned to conserve energy over lifetimes. Vera worked at a military research facility in California before the bombs fell. She wasn't directly involved in the Deathclaw project, but she knew people who were. More importantly, she remembers the culture of fear and secrecy that surrounded certain black site operations in the months before the war. They were rushing everything near the end. She says, her voice carrying the dry rasp common to ghouls. Projects that should have taken years were being greenlit in weeks. Safety protocols were ignored. Ethics committees were disbanded. The military knew the war was coming, and they wanted their superweapons ready. The Deathclaw project was one of dozens, but it was special. It was the one they thought would change everything. She sits down carefully in a chair that creaks under even her slight weight. I remember seeing a researcher in a bar about a month before the bombs. He was drunk, which was dangerous for someone with his clearance. He kept saying they'd gone too far, that they'd made something that couldn't be unmade. When I asked what he meant, he just looked at me with these hollow eyes and said, "We've created the perfect survivor. Everything we are, everything we've built, it's all going to belong to them now. The third member of your group is different from the others. His name is Jackson Cole, and he's a Wasteland tracker. No faction allegiance, no political agenda. Just a man who spent 20 years learning to read the Wasteland like a book. He's in his 30s, lean and weathered, with scars that tell stories he rarely shares. Most importantly, he's survived 3 separate Deathclaw encounters. That alone makes him worth listening to. Cole doesn't talk much during the initial meeting. He studies your maps, traces routes with a calloused finger, nods occasionally. When he finally speaks, his voice is quiet, but carries weight. "You're looking at this all wrong," he says. "You're thinking about them like they're just another wasteland creature. Bigger, meaner, but fundamentally the same as rad scorpions or Yao Guai. They're not." He taps a location on your map, a place called Quarry Junction. I watched a pack operate there for 2 weeks. They post sentries. They coordinate hunts. The alpha female, I watched her discipline a younger male that broke formation. Not with violence, with body language, with authority. These things have social structures more complex than most human settlements. I've seen Dottie pulls out a worn notebook filled with sketches and observations. I've tracked dozens of species across the wasteland. Everything from mole rats to fog crawlers. Nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to them in terms of intelligence and adaptability. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night. He leans forward. They're getting smarter. Each generation shows more advanced behavior than the last. Whatever they started as, they're evolving into something more. Your bunker has become a command center now. The 4 of you spend days organizing information, cross-referencing records, building timelines. The walls that were once covered with scattered notes now display a comprehensive web of connections. Pre-war military installations, post-war enclave facilities, vault experiments, eyewitness accounts from across the wasteland. Slowly, inevitably, a picture begins to emerge. Webb brings up a holographic display from his datapad. It shows a genetic sequence, complex and deliberately engineered. This is from a tissue sample we recovered from a Deathclaw killed near the Citadel. The DNA isn't natural. It's been heavily modified, spliced with genetic material from multiple sources. But here's what's interesting. He expands a section of the sequence. This modification pattern matches techniques that were cutting edge before the war. Techniques that only a handful of facilities had access to. This wasn't some rogue scientist in amazement. This was a major military operation with serious funding. Vera adds her perspective, pulling from memories over 2 centuries old. I remember hearing about bioweapon programs being funded through black budgets. Money that Congress never saw, projects that had no official oversight. The military was obsessed with force multiplication. How do you make one soldier worth 10? Worth 100? The answer they kept coming back to was, you don't enhance the soldier. You create something new. Cole contributes practical knowledge that can only come from direct observation. Their territory spans thousands of miles now. I've found evidence of them in every major region of what used to be America. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. And they're territorial in ways that suggest long-term planning. The big nesting sites like Quarry Junction and Deadwind Cavern, those aren't random. They're strategically positioned to control resources and migration routes. It's like watching a new civilization stake its claim. As the four of you work, the bunker fills with the detritus of obsessive research. Coffee cups accumulate on surfaces. Meal rations get eaten cold because no one wants to take a break. Sleep becomes something you steal in brief hours between breakthroughs. The holotape you found plays and replays, each listening revealing new details. The voice on the tape belongs to Dr. Richard Hawthorne, a military geneticist who worked at what the file identifies as Site Omega, a black site laboratory somewhere in the Southwest. His entries are dated, starting from 18 months before the Great War, and continuing right up until 3 days before the bombs fell. First entry, his voice crisp and professional. Project Deathclaw has been authorized for full development. Our objective is to create a biological weapons platform capable of operating independently in hostile territory. The base species has been selected. Jackson's chameleon, native to East Africa. Aggressive, adaptable, and possessing genetic traits that respond favorably to manipulation. Initial modifications will focus on size enhancement and increased muscle density. The entries continue, each one showing the project's rapid progression. Size targets exceeded. Specimens reaching 9 to 10 feet in height. Muscle density calculations show strength levels approximately 12 times human normal. Dermal plating developing as expected. Early combat trials extremely promising. Subject 7 destroyed or reinforced. Barrier in under 30 seconds. But it's the later entries that make your blood run cold. The ones where Hawthorne's professional demeanor begins to crack. We've encountered an unexpected development. The specimens are exhibiting behaviors that suggest higher cognitive function than designed. Subject 12 has been observed using tools. Simple manipulation of environment to create advantages during feeding trials. This wasn't part of the base programming. We're seeing emergent intelligence. And then, in one of the final entries, his voice barely above a whisper. They're watching us. I know how that sounds, but I swear it's true. When we observe them through the glass, they observe us back. Not with animal curiosity, with assessment, with calculation. Yesterday, Subject 18 manipulated a containment system failure, made it look like equipment malfunction. 3 technicians died before we could reseal the chamber. When we reviewed the footage, you could see it in the creature's eyes. It knew exactly what it was doing. God help us. We've created something that understands cause and effect. The final entry is dated October 20th, 2077. 3 days before the world ended. Project termination has been ordered. Not by our command structure, but from somewhere higher up. We're told to destroy all specimens and wipe the research. But it's too late. The specimens in containment, they know something's wrong. They're agitated, aggressive. The security teams are scared. I can see it in their faces. And honestly, so am I, because I've spent 2 years studying these creatures, and I know one thing for certain. If they get out, if they survive what's coming, nothing in the Wasteland will be able to stop them. We haven't just created a weapon. We've created the future's apex predator. The holotape ends with the sound of alarms and something that might be screaming. You look at your three companions in the dim light of the bunker. Webb's face is grim, his brotherhood training warring with the implications of what you've all just heard. Vera's ancient eyes hold a sadness that comes from watching humanity repeat its mistakes across centuries. Cole simply nods, as if this confirms what he's always suspected. Outside, the wasteland night is falling. The temperature drops, and somewhere in the distance, you hear it. That sound that every wastelander has learned to fear. A roar that seems to vibrate through the very earth. Deep, powerful, triumphant. The hunt is about to begin. Not out there in the darkness, but here in the light of your bunker. A hunt for truth. A hunt for answers. A hunt to understand how humanity's greatest weapon became its most terrifying legacy. Webb breaks the silence. We need to trace this back to the beginning. Find out where they came from, how they spread, what they've become. Every facility, every experiment, every encounter. We need the complete picture Vera adds, and we need to understand what happened after the war. The Enclave got involved somehow. I've heard rumors for decades about intelligent Deathclaws, about experiments that went places even the pre-war military wouldn't go. Cole stands, stretching muscles sore from hours of sitting. Then we're going to need to travel. The answers aren't all going to be in data files and holotapes. We need to visit the sites, talk to survivors, see the territories with our own eyes. You look at your map one more time. Red dots scattered across a dead nation. Each one representing a piece of the puzzle. Each one potentially holding answers, or death, or both. The Geiger counter in the corner clicks steadily, measuring radiation that will outlive everyone in this room. Your Pip-Boy displays the time. 2287. 210 years after Dr. Hawthorne made his last recording. 210 years of evolution, mutation, and survival. 210 years for the Deathclaws to become what they were always meant to be. The perfect survivors in a world designed to kill everything else. Tomorrow, you'll begin the journey. You'll walk into territories where even Brotherhood paladins fear to tread. You'll dig through ruins that hold secrets people killed to protect. You'll face truths that will reshape everything you thought you knew about the wasteland and your place in it. But tonight, in this bunker surrounded by evidence of humanity's hubris, you allow yourself one moment of doubt. One quiet question spoken to the darkness. What if we're not supposed to survive them? What if they're meant to replace us? The wasteland offers no answer. It never does. It simply waits, patient and eternal, for the next chapter in the story of predator and prey to unfold. And outside, in the cooling desert night, something moves through the shadows. Something with claws that scrape stone and eyes that reflect the distant stars. Something that has no idea it's part of a story being told. Or perhaps it does. Perhaps it's been listening all along. The morning sun rises over the wasteland, like it has every day for 2 centuries, indifferent to the stories unfolding beneath it. You stand outside your bunker, watching the horizon blur in the heat shimmer, knowing that today, everything changes. The comfortable distance of research, of documents and theories, ends now. What begins is something far more dangerous. Webb arrives first, his power armor gleaming in the harsh light. He's brought supplies from the Brotherhood, medical equipment and ammunition that speaks volumes about what he expects you'll encounter. 3 heavy cases sit at his feet, each one marked with the Brotherhood's insignia and security codes that probably took him considerable political capital to access. Inside, those cases are research files that technically don't exist. Black site documentation that survived the war through sheer luck or perhaps divine intervention. He opens the first case carefully, reverently, like a priest handling sacred texts. What's revealed are pre-war military documents, their pages yellowed but legible. Stamped with security clearances that would have meant execution for unauthorized viewing in the old world. This is everything the Brotherhood has on pre-war bioweapon development. Webb explains. Most of it came from the Pentagon ruins, recovered during our early operations in the capital Wasteland. Some of it we traded for, some we fought for, and some we found in places we're not supposed to talk about. He hands you a folder marked Project Deathclaw. Authorization level 12. If even half of what's in here is accurate, we're looking at a conspiracy that goes back decades before the bombs fell. The documents tell a story that makes your hands shake as you read. In 2063, 14 years before the Great War, the United States military initiated a classified program under the Defense Intelligence Agency. The goal was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Create a biological alternative to human soldiers that could be deployed in the most hostile environments imaginable. Chemical warfare zones. Extreme radiation. Territories where human troops would last minutes. If that, the project had a budget that dwarfed most conventional weapons programs. Billions of dollars funneled through shell companies and black budgets, hidden from congressional oversight through layers of bureaucratic obfuscation. The scientists recruited weren't just geneticists. They were visionaries, people who looked at the limitations of human biology and saw them as problems to be solved rather than constraints to be accepted. Dr. Richard Hawthorne was the lead geneticist, but he wasn't alone. The files contain names and photographs of dozens of researchers, each one a specialist in their field. Dr. Sarah Chun, expert in accelerated growth hormones. Dr. Marcus Volkov, pioneer in genetic resilience to radiation. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, whose work on predatory instincts in reptilian species was considered groundbreaking. These weren't mad scientists in some pulp fiction sense. They were the best minds their generation produced, and they were genuinely trying to save American lives. The base species selection alone took 3 years. They tested everything. Komodo dragons, alligators, various monitor lizards. But it was the Jackson's chameleon that proved ideal. Native to East Africa, this species possessed several traits that made it perfect for genetic enhancement. Natural aggression balanced with territorial intelligence. A robust skeletal structure that could support massive size increases. And perhaps most importantly, a genetic plasticity that responded favorably to modification. Vera arrives as you're deep in the files, and her reaction to seeing the documentation is visceral. She picks up one of the photographs, a group shot of the research team standing in front of what must be Site Omega. Her finger traces over the faces, stopping on a young woman with dark hair and a cautious smile. I knew her, Vera says quietly. Dr. Chun. We attended the same conferences before the war. She was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, but she had doubts. I remember her giving a presentation on ethical boundaries in genetic research. She argued that just because we could do something didn't mean we should. I wonder if she remembered that speech when she was splicing chameleon DNA with growth hormones. The files contain detailed timelines of the project's progression. Initial trials in 2064 produced specimens that were impressive, but ultimately failures. Too aggressive to control, or not aggressive enough to be effective. Too large to be practical, or not large enough to provide significant advantage over conventional weapons. Each failure was catalogued, analyzed, and used to refine the next attempt. By 2067, they'd achieved their first successful prototype. Subject designation Alpha 1. The files include photographs that make your breath catch. Even in grainy pre-war color, you can see the massive musculature, the horn-crowned skull, the claws that look like they could tear through tank armor. The caption notes its height at 9 feet, 4 inches. Weight approximately 800 pounds. Combat effectiveness rated at exceptional levels. But it's the behavioral notes that reveal something unexpected. Alpha 1 shows problem-solving abilities beyond initial projections. Capable of learning from observation. demonstrates what appears to be tactical thinking during combat scenarios. One researcher noted that during a trial run through an obstacle course designed to simulate urban warfare, the creature didn't just overcome obstacles. It studied them first, planned its approach, and executed with precision that suggested genuine strategic thinking. Cole arrives late, which is unusual for him. When he does appear, there's tension in his shoulders that wasn't there yesterday. He's been scouting, checking the routes you'll need to travel to visit the first research site. What he found clearly troubles him. "We've got a problem," he says without preamble. The direct route to what's left of Site Omega takes us through Deathclaw territory. Not just their hunting grounds, but actual nesting areas. I found tracks this morning, fresh ones. A pack of at least 6 adults, maybe more. They're active, and they're ranging farther from their den than normal.web considers this. His tactical mind already calculating alternatives. Can we go around? Longer route, but safer? Cole shakes his head. Going around adds 2 weeks to the journey and takes us through raider territory that's been getting increasingly aggressive. We're stuck between multiple threats, none of them good. He spreads a map on your workbench, marked with his own notations. But here's the thing that really worries me. These tracks, they're not random patrol patterns. They're systematic, like they're searching for something or guarding against something. That's not normal behavior, even for them. You study the documents in front of you, then look at your companions. Each one of them is here for different reasons. Webb seeks knowledge to protect the Brotherhood and preserve pre-war technology. Vira carries the guilt of a generation that created these monsters. Cole simply wants to understand the apex predator he's spent years observing. And you? You need to know if humanity's greatest weapon is also its final judgment. The decision forms before you can second-guess it. We go through their territory, the direct route. Because if we're going to understand them, really understand them, we need to see them in their natural habitat. We need to witness what they've become. Webb looks at you like you've lost your mind, which is fair. That's not caution talking. That's suicide. Do you have any idea what a pack of Deathclaws can do to a group like ours? I've seen entire Brotherhood squads wiped out in minutes, which is why we go prepared, you counter. We're not going to engage them. We observe, we document, we stay at distance. This is a research expedition, not a hunting party. Vera's ancient eyes study you with an expression you can't quite read. You remind me of the researchers I knew before the war. That same conviction that knowledge justifies risk. I wonder if Dr. Hawthorne said something similar before his final entry on that. HOLO taped out the words sting, because they're true, but they don't change your mind. The files in front of you contain pieces of a puzzle, but pieces aren't enough. You need to see the complete picture, and that means going to the source. Site Omega isn't just where the Deathclaws were created. According to the documents, it's where the most advanced specimens were kept. If any records survived, if any evidence remains of what they truly intended to create, it'll be there. The next 3 days are spent in preparation. Webb trains you on proper combat protocols, how to move quietly in power armor, how to recognize threat indicators before they become fatal. His Brotherhood discipline is evident in every lesson, every drill. He's preparing you for war while hoping you won't need it. Cole teaches you to read signs in the Wasteland, the subtle indicators that mark Deathclaw territory. Claw marks on specific rocks at specific angles, marking boundaries. The particular way vegetation is crushed when something massive passes through. The scent, musky and sharp, that lingers in areas they frequent. By the 3rd day, you're starting to see the Wasteland through his eyes. As a living document written in tracks and signs, Vera contributes something unexpected. She sits with you one evening and tells you about the culture of pre-war military research. The pressure these scientists were under, the impossible demands made of them. The government wanted miracles, and they wanted them yesterday. The researchers delivered, but at what cost? They were good people, most of them, she says. They believed they were serving a greater purpose, protecting America, saving soldiers' lives, ensuring victory in a war everyone knew was coming. But there's a quote from one of the old philosophers, Oppenheimer, I think. When you're working on something that could change the world, you don't stop to think if you should. You only think about whether you can. She pulls out something she's kept for over 2 centuries, a small journal with water-damaged pages. These are my notes from that era. Conferences I attended, conversations I had, rumors I heard. There's an entry here from August 2077, just a few months before the end. She reads aloud, her voice carrying the weight of memory. Dr. Volkov was drunk at a mixer, talking too freely about his projects. He said they'd achieved something remarkable at Site Omega, a specimen that exceeded every parameter they'd set. But he was scared. Said it looked at him like it was calculating how to break containment. Like it was just waiting for the right moment. The journal entry continues. I asked him what made this specimen different from the others. He got quiet, really quiet, and then he said something I'll never forget. He said they'd accidentally introduced a variable into the genetic sequence. Something from the FEV research that was happening in parallel programs. The specimen had been exposed, not enough to cause the typical mutations, but enough to enhance its cognitive development beyond anything they'd planned for. He called it Subject Omega Prime, said it was both their greatest success and their biggest nightmare. You look up from the journal. What happened to it? To Subject Omega Prime? Vera closes the journal carefully. I don't know. 3 weeks after that conversation, the bombs fell. Everything went to hell. But if it was at Site Omega, and if it survived the blast, and it's been out there in the Wasteland for 200 years, growing, learning, possibly breeding, the implications hang in the air like fallout. If an enhanced specimen survived, if it passed on its traits, then the Deathclaws in the Wasteland today might be descended from something far more dangerous than the standard military prototypes. They might carry genetic advantages that make them not just predators, but strategic thinkers, planners, maybe even leaders. Webb has been listening quietly. He stands, his chair scraping against the concrete floor. That's what we're going to find out. We leave at dawn. Site Omega is 4 days' travel if we move fast and the weather holds. We stick together, we watch each other's backs, and we don't take unnecessary risks. Understood? Everyone agrees, though you can see the tension in Cole's jaw, the worry in Vera's ancient eyes. This isn't a casual expedition. This is walking into the heart of darkness, hoping the monsters that live there are too busy to notice. That night, you can't sleep. You stand outside the bunker, watching the stars that are finally visible again after 2 centuries of nuclear winter clouds clearing. The wasteland is quiet, but it's the kind of quiet that feels temporary, like the world is holding its breath. You think about Dr. Hawthorne's final words on that holotape, about Subject 18 manipulating a containment failure, about the creatures watching their creators with calculating eyes, about the assessment that if they survived, nothing would be able to stop them. Somewhere out in the darkness, perhaps 50 miles away, perhaps less, a pack of Deathclaws is settling down for the night in their territory. They don't know you're coming. They don't care about your questions or your research. They're simply living, hunting, surviving in a world that's tried for 2 centuries to kill everything. But maybe, just maybe, they do know. Maybe they've learned to recognize the signs of human movement through their lands. Maybe they're already aware that something is coming. Something small and soft and easy to kill. If it weren't for the machines and weapons it carries, the thought should terrify you. Instead, it fills you with a strange sense of anticipation. Because in 4 days, you'll stand in the place where humanity tried to play God. You'll walk the halls where the future's apex predator was designed, tested, and ultimately released into a dying world. And if you're very lucky, you'll survive long enough to tell the story. The stars offer no judgment, no warning. They simply shine, as they have for billions of years, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding on the irradiated rock below. You turn back to the bunker, to one last night of relative safety before the journey begins. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tomorrow, you walk into the jaws of history itself. Dawn breaks across the wasteland in shades of orange and purple that would be beautiful if you didn't know they were caused by atmospheric radiation, still lingering from bombs dropped 2 centuries ago. You stand at the edge of your bunker's perimeter, watching the sun climb over distant mountains that were once called Sierra Nevada. Everything you need for the expedition is packed, checked, and rechecked. Webb's power armor hums quietly, its servos making small adjustments as he distributes weight. Cole has his rifle slung across his back, his eyes already scanning the horizon for threats that haven't appeared yet. Vera moves with the careful economy of someone who has learned over 200 years that wasted motion is wasted life. The journey to Site Omega will take you through some of the most dangerous territory in the Wasteland. First, you'll cross the remains of what used to be Interstate 15, now a cracked ribbon of asphalt, where cazadores nest in abandoned vehicles and raiders set up ambush points in the overpasses. Then comes the long stretch through the Mojave proper, where the heat alone can kill the unprepared. Finally, you'll enter the region marked on pre-war maps as restricted military zone, a place that was dangerous before the bombs and has only gotten worse since Webb takes point. His power armor sensors extending your group's detection range significantly. He's set the systems to passive mode, receiving information rather than broadcasting it. The last thing you need is to announce your presence to every hostile within a 5-mile radius. Cole ranges ahead on foot, his wasteland tracker instincts guiding him toward the safest paths through terrain that wants to kill you in a dozen different ways. You walk beside Vera, matching your pace to hers. Despite her gallification, despite the 2 centuries she's endured, she moves with surprising steadiness. The wasteland has been her home longer than it was ever civilization's, and she knows its rhythms like you know your own heartbeat. The first few hours pass in relative silence. The desert is waking up, and with it come the sounds that define the post-apocalyptic world. The skitter of rodroaches seeking shade, the distant howl of something that might be a coyote, but probably isn't. Your Geiger counter maintains a steady click, measuring background radiation that would have been considered catastrophic before the war, but now is simply the price of being alive around midday. Cole signals a halt. He's found something that makes him uneasy, which means the rest of you should be terrified. You gather around him near an outcropping of rocks that provides minimal shade from the relentless sun. He points to the ground, where the sand has been disturbed in patterns that tell a story to those who can read it. Deathclaw tracks, he says unnecessarily. Everyone can see the massive 3-toed prints pressed deep into the earth. But look at the spacing, the depth. This was a young one, maybe 2 years old, not fully grown yet. He follows the trail with his eyes, his expression grim. It was moving fast, not hunting, running from something or toward something. Webb kneels down, his power armor whining slightly with the movement. His helmet sensors scan the tracks, feeding data to the display only he can see. Tracks are approximately 18 hours old. The creature was heading northwest, which is perpendicular to our route. We should be clear. Should be isn't the same as will be, you observe. And Cole nods his agreement. Vera has wandered a short distance away, examining something else entirely. She's found the remains of a campsite, old enough that the ashes have been scattered by wind, but recent enough that traces still remain. She picks up a piece of fabric, scorched at the edges and her expression grows somber. Wastelanders, she says. A family group, judging by the size of the camp. They were headed south, probably making for one of the larger settlements. She doesn't need to explain what happened to them. The lack of bodies tells its own story. Deathclaws don't leave remains. The discovery casts a pall over the group. It's one thing to study these creatures academically, to examine their origins in pre-war laboratories, and discuss their evolution in abstract terms. It's another entirely to confront the reality of what they do, the lives they end, the families they destroy. For a moment, you question the wisdom of this expedition. What right do you have to understand these monsters? What good will knowledge do for people who are just trying to survive? But then you remember Dr. Hawthorne's voice on that holotape, the fear and fascination mixed together. You remember the photographs of researchers who believed they were doing something important, something necessary. Understanding doesn't mean forgiving. It means being prepared. It means maybe, just maybe, finding a way for humanity to coexist with the perfect predator it created. The journey continues. By late afternoon, you've covered nearly 20 miles, which is good progress considering the terrain and the constant need for vigilance. The landscape gradually changes as you move deeper into what used to be military-controlled territory. The desert gives way to rocky badlands, dotted with the skeletal remains of pre-war infrastructure. You pass a communications tower that's been twisted into abstract sculpture by some long-ago explosion. You navigate around a crater that's still hot enough to register on your radiation detectors, suggesting something volatile was stored there when the bombs fell. Webb suddenly raises a fist, the Brotherhood's signal for immediate stop and silence. Everyone freezes. His armor's sensors have detected something, and from the way his hand moves to his weapon, it's not friendly. He gestures for the group to take cover behind a collapsed section of concrete wall, something that might have been a checkpoint booth in the old world. Movement ahead. He subvocalizes through the team radio. Multiple contacts. Not Deathclaws. Human-sized signatures. Poorly organized formation. Likely raiders. Cole edges forward, using the scope on his rifle to get a better look. He counts under his breath, then slides back to the group. 8 of them, maybe 9. They've set up on the road ahead, probably hoping to catch travelers moving between settlements. They don't look particularly competent, but they've got numbers. You weigh the options. Engaging means noise, and noise in Deathclaw territory is asking for trouble. But going around will cost hours and take you through terrain that Cole hasn't scouted. There's also a principle at stake. These raiders are preying on people trying to survive, and while you're not the Wasteland police, letting them continue feels wrong. Vera offers an unexpected solution. She steps out from behind cover before anyone can stop her, walking directly toward the raider position with her hands visible and empty. Webb curses quietly, but holds position. Whatever she's planning, interfering now would only make it worse. You watch through binoculars as Vera approaches the raiders. Their leader, a man with a mohawk and more scars than sense, levels a weapon at her. She stops, says something you can't hear. The raider leader laughs, then gestures for his group to surround her. They're expecting an easy target, an old ghoul they can rob, or worse. What happens next is a masterclass in Wasteland psychology. Vera doesn't fight. She talks. You can't hear the words, but you can see the effect. The raider's body language changes from aggressive to uncertain. The leader lowers his weapon. One of them actually backs away. After several minutes of conversation, Vera turns and walks back toward your position. The raiders don't follow. They're already packing up their ambush, moving out. When she rejoins the group, Cole asks the obvious question. What did you tell them? Vera's smile is grim. The truth. That we're heading into the deep wastes where the big ones hunt. that anyone following us would be signing their own death warrant. That I've lived 200 years in this hell, and the only reason I'm still breathing is because I know which fights to avoid. She glances back at the raiders, now distant figures on the horizon. I also told them there's a caravan due through here tomorrow from New Vegas, poorly guarded and heavy with supplies. Gave them an easier target. Webb looks uncomfortable with that, his brotherhood ethics conflicting with practical survival. You just sent them toward other people who'll be ready for them. Vera counters. I made sure to mention the caravan route loudly enough that any smart raider would know it's a trap. The NCR has been running sting operations along this corridor for months. Those raiders are about to get a very educational encounter with actual soldiers. The moral ambiguity of the Wasteland is never clearer than in moments like this. There are no clean choices, no heroic solutions. There's only survival and the compromises you make to achieve it. As evening approaches, you make camp in the ruins of what your Pip-Boy identifies as a pre-war research station, something civilian rather than military. The building is mostly collapsed, but one corner remains intact enough to provide shelter. Cole checks the perimeter, while Webb sets up motion sensors that will alert you to any approaching threats. Vera starts a small fire using debris that won't create much smoke. And you begin preparing the evening meal from the rations you brought. The sunset is spectacular in the way that post-apocalyptic sunsets often are. The dust and radiation in the atmosphere, creating colors that nature never intended. You sit with your back against a wall that still has traces of pre-war paint, eating reconstituted food and watching the wasteland transform from hostile to deadly as darkness falls. Webb removes his helmet, a rare gesture that speaks to his comfort level with the current camp security. His face is weathered, lined with stress and old scars. He's been thinking about something, you can tell, working through some problem in his mind. I've been reviewing the documents, he finally says. The genetic modifications they made to create the Deathclaws, they weren't random. Every change had a purpose. The increased muscle density wasn't just about strength, it was about sustained performance. These things can run at high speed for miles without tiring. The dermal plating isn't just armor, it's radiation shielding. They designed them to thrive in exactly the kind of environment the nuclear war created. Vera pokes at the fire with a stick, sending sparks drifting into the darkening sky. That's the part that keeps me awake, she says quietly. The question of whether they knew, whether the scientists who created these things understood that they were building survivors for a post-apocalyptic world, or if it was just coincidence that every adaptation they engineered happened to be perfect for life after the bombs. Cole has been quiet, but now he speaks up. It wasn't coincidence. I've seen too many Wastelanders, too many creatures trying to adapt to the radiation and the heat and the scarcity. Most of them are barely hanging on. But the Deathclaws? They're not just surviving, they're dominating. That doesn't happen by accident. You pull out your notebook, adding observations to the growing collection of data. The pattern is becoming clearer the more you learn. The Deathclaws weren't just weapons for the war that was coming. They were insurance for the world that would exist after. Someone in the military, someone high enough to see the bigger picture, understood that nuclear war was inevitable. And they made sure that something would survive it, something strong enough to inherit whatever remained. The night deepens, and with it comes the sounds of the wasteland after dark. Things move in the darkness beyond your firelight, creatures that have learned to hunt when human senses are weakest. Your motion sensors remain silent, which is reassuring, but also somehow ominous. The predators out there are avoiding you, which means they've identified you as a threat. Or they're saving you for later. Webb takes first watch, his power armor allowing him to remain alert longer than any unaugmented human. Cole takes second, his wasteland instincts worth more than any technology. Vera volunteers for third. reminding everyone that ghouls need less sleep than normal humans. You're assigned the final watch before dawn, the quiet hours when the world is caught between night and day. Sleep comes reluctantly, filled with dreams of laboratories and creatures with calculating eyes. You dream of Dr. Hawthorne standing in front of a containment cell, watching something massive move in the shadows beyond the glass. You dream of the moment the bombs fell, of specimens breaking free from their cages as the world ended above them. You dream of 200 years of evolution, compressed into a nightmare sequence of growth and adaptation and inevitable dominance. You wake to Cole's hand on your shoulder, his expression telling you it's time for your watch. The camp is quiet except for Webb's gentle snoring, a surprisingly human sound coming from a man in power armor. Vera sits by the dying fire, staring into the embers like she's reading prophecy in the coals. Can't sleep? You ask quietly, settling in beside her. She shakes her head. I sleep less than I used to. One of the benefits of gallification, I suppose. More time to think. More time to remember. She looks at you, her radiation-scarred face somehow conveying warmth, despite its damaged state. Do you know what I remember most about the world before? Not the technology or the convenience or the safety. I remember the certainty. The absolute conviction everyone had that humanity was in control, that we were the masters of the planet, and nothing could change that dot. And now? You prompt. Now I watch Deathclaws hunt in packs with tactical precision that would impress a military commander. I see them adapt to new threats in months rather than generations. I hear stories from across the Wasteland about them exhibiting behaviors that suggest genuine intelligence. And I wonder if we were ever really in control, or if we just told ourselves that story to sleep better at night. The conversation fades into comfortable silence. You keep watch as the wasteland slowly transitions from night to dawn, and somewhere in that gradual brightening, you realize something profound. This journey isn't just about understanding where Deathclaws came from. It's about understanding where humanity is going. Because in a world where the apex predator was designed in a laboratory, where the most successful survivor is a human creation, the line between creator and created becomes increasingly blurred. The sun rises on your third day in the wasteland, and ahead lies Site Omega. Somewhere in those ruins are answers. Somewhere in that darkness is the truth about what humanity unleashed upon itself. And somewhere, perhaps watching from a distance you can't see, the inheritors of that legacy continue their patient, inevitable rise to dominance. Site Omega rises from the desert floor like a tombstone marking civilization's grave. What remains of the facility is mostly underground, which explains how any of it survived the nuclear bombardment that turned the surrounding landscape into glass. The entrance is a reinforced blast door, half buried in sand and debris, its surface scorched black but still intact. Security warnings that were once bright yellow have faded to ghostly gray, barely readable after 2 centuries of exposure. Authorized personnel only. Biological hazard level 4. Lethal force authorized. Cole approaches first, reading the ground like a book written in dust and time. His fingers trace patterns in the sand around the entrance, and what he finds makes his jaw tighten. Multiple sets of tracks converge here, some old enough to be barely visible, others disturbingly recent. Not human tracks. The 3-toed impressions are unmistakable, each one pressed deep enough into the hard pan to suggest creatures weighing close to 1,000 pounds. They used this place? Cole says, his voice barely above a whisper. Not as a den. The tracks would be different if they nested here. But they come regularly. Patrolling maybe, or checking something. He points to a series of marks on the blast door itself, deep gouges in the reinforced steel. These are fresh. Within the last few days, something big has been testing this door. Webb's power armor sensors paint the area in thermal signatures and radiation readings. The underground portions of the facility are cooler than the surrounding desert, which makes sense. What doesn't make sense is the faint electromagnetic signature his equipment is detecting. There's power down there. Not much, maybe emergency backups running on fusion batteries that were built to last centuries. But something is still active in the depths of Site Omega. Vera stands apart from the group, staring at the facility entrance with an expression that might be reverence or might be dread. She's pulled out her pre-war journal again, flipping through pages until she finds what she's looking for. Her voice when she speaks carries the weight of memory that's had 200 years to ferment into something approaching prophecy. I wrote about this place, she says. Not by name. We weren't supposed to know the names. But there were rumors among the scientific community. A black site in the Nevada desert where they were doing work that made even the Phi researchers nervous. There was a physicist I knew, worked at one of the smaller weapons labs. He got drunk one night and told me about a colleague who'd been recruited for something extraordinary. They told him he'd be working on the future of American defense. When he came back 6 months later, he wasn't the same. Wouldn't talk about what he'd seen, wouldn't even acknowledge the project existed. But he told my friend one thing before he disappeared into classified work permanently. He said they'd built something that would make nuclear weapons obsolete. Something that couldn't be stopped by conventional means. The blast door is designed to withstand direct nuclear strikes, which explains why it's still functional. What's less clear is how to open it. The control panel beside the entrance is dark, its systems presumably dead after 2 centuries without maintenance. Webb examines it closely, his brotherhood training in pre-war technology, giving him insights the rest of you lack. The locking mechanism is mechanical as much as electronic, he explains. Fail-safe design. Even if the power dies, the door can be opened manually from inside. But from outside, we'd need either the correct access codes or about 3 days with plasma cutters. He pauses, running his armored hand along the door's edge. Wait, there's an emergency override. Military installations always had them. In case command needed to access the facility during a crisis. It takes him 20 minutes to locate the override panel, hidden behind a section of wall that's designed to look like solid concrete. Inside is a manual crank system, primitive but effective. The 4 of you take turns working the crank, and slowly, with the grinding protest of mechanisms that haven't moved in 2 centuries, the blast door begins to open. The smell hits you first. Stale air that's been trapped underground since before you were born, mixed with something organic and wrong. It's the scent of decay, but old decay, mummified rather than rotted. And underneath it, fainter but unmistakable, that musky odor that Cole taught you to recognize. Deathclaws have been inside this facility. Webb activates his armor's floodlights, and the beams cut through darkness that seems almost solid. The entrance corridor stretches ahead, tiles still somehow intact on the floor, walls lined with doors that bear departmental designations. Genetics Lab 3, Biocontainment Suite B Specimen Observation 7. This wasn't just a research facility. This was an empire of scientific ambition, sprawling across multiple subterranean levels. The power situation becomes clear as you descend. Emergency lighting flickers to life in some sections, triggered by motion sensors that somehow still function. In other areas, darkness is absolute, broken only by your flashlights and Webb's armor illumination. The facility's fusion reactor must still be operational somewhere deep below, providing enough power to maintain basic systems, but nothing more. You pass through what must have been a security checkpoint, and here you find the first bodies. Skeletons and the remnants of military uniforms, weapons still clutched in bony hands. They died at their posts when the bombs fell, or perhaps in the chaos immediately after. One skeleton slumps against a wall, with what looks like claw marks scored deep into the concrete beside it. Whatever killed this guard had the strength to carve stone, The main research level is a cathedral to pre-war science. Laboratory benches stretch in neat rows. Equipment still in place, though most of it is dark and dead. Computers that once held classified data now sit silent, their screens cracked or missing entirely. Filing cabinets have been torn open, their contents scattered across the floor in drifts of yellowed paper. Something came through here searching for something. And it wasn't gentle about the process. Vera picks up one of the scattered documents. Handling it with the care of someone who understands that paper 2 centuries old is as fragile as hope. Her hands shake slightly as she reads, and when she looks up, her ancient eyes are bright with unshed tears. These are the testing protocols, she says, for live subjects. They were running combat scenarios against human-shaped targets. The language is clinical, detached, but they're describing how efficiently their creations could kill people. She reads aloud, her voice hollow. Test 47. Subject Alpha 6 successfully eliminated 12 targets in under 90 seconds. Coordination between specimens improved when operating in pack formation. Recommend enhancement of pack bonding instincts in next generation. Cole has found something else, and from his expression, it's worse than the testing protocols. He's standing in front of a large window that looks into what must be a containment cell. The glass is reinforced, probably bulletproof, but there are cracks, spiderwebbing across its surface. Something hit this barrier hard enough to nearly break through. Inside the cell, you can see the remains of what they kept here. Massive chains bolted to the floor and walls, feeding mechanisms, and scratched into the concrete in letters 2 feet high. A message that makes your blood freeze. They think the handwriting is crude, almost certainly made with claws rather than tools. But the formation of the letters is too precise to be accidental. Something in that cell learned to write, learned to communicate, and used its final moments to leave a warning or perhaps a declaration. Webb's voice comes through the team radio, tight with barely controlled alarm. I'm picking up movement on the lower levels. Multiple signatures. Large. They're not approaching, but they're definitely down there. This facility goes deeper than the blueprints suggested. You gather around a wall-mounted map that shows Site Omega's layout. And Webb is right. The official levels only go down 3 floors. But someone has hand-drawn additions to the map, sketching in levels 4, 5, and 6. Beside these unauthorized floors, annotations in cramped handwriting. Deep storage. Special specimens. Omega Prime Holding Facility. That name again. Omega Prime, the enhanced specimen that Vera heard about before the war. The creature that supposedly carried traits beyond what the standard Deathclaw project intended. If it existed, if it survived, this is where it would have been kept. The facility's computer systems are mostly dead, but Webb manages to coax one terminal back to life. It's connected to some kind of local network, isolated from the outside world, but still functional within the facility. The data it contains is fragmentary, corrupted by time and radiation, but pieces remain. Security logs, research notes, video files that are too damaged to play. One document catches your attention. It's dated October 18th, 2077, just 5 days before the Great War. The sender is listed as Dr. Hawthorne, the same man whose voice you heard on the holotape. The recipient is someone identified only as General Kellerman. You read it aloud for the others. General Kellerman, I am officially requesting immediate termination of the Omega Prime project. What we have created goes beyond our original parameters and poses an unacceptable risk. Subject Omega Prime has demonstrated problem-solving abilities equivalent to human intelligence. Yesterday, it manipulated 3 separate containment systems simultaneously to create a cascading failure that nearly resulted in a full breach. Only the fail-safe protocols prevented catastrophe. More concerning is the behavioral change we've observed. The subject has ceased aggressive responses to testing. Instead, it appears to be studying us, learning from observation, planning. I cannot overstate how dangerous this situation has become. Whatever we've created, it's not a weapon we can control. It's something else entirely. Awaiting your authorization to proceed with euthanasia protocols. Hawthorne, Vera's voice is quiet when she speaks. There's no response in the system. Either the general never replied, or the bombs fell before he could. Cole has been exploring the deeper sections, moving with the silent efficiency of someone who's spent years learning to walk through dangerous places without being noticed. When he returns, his face is pale beneath the Wasteland tan dot. You need to see level 4, he says simply. But be prepared. It's not pretty. The descent to the 4th level requires navigating a stairwell that's partially collapsed. Webb goes first, his power armor's strength allowing him to move debris that would be impossible for unaugmented humans. The emergency lighting is completely dead here, leaving you dependent on portable illumination. It seems pitifully inadequate against the pressing darkness. Level 4 is different from the research areas above. This floor is all containment, row after row of reinforced cells designed to hold things that must never be allowed to escape. Most of the cells are empty now, their doors torn open from the inside with such force that hinges were ripped from reinforced concrete. But in some cells, you find what remains of the specimens that didn't survive whatever happened when the bombs fell. The corpses are mummified rather than decomposed, preserved by the dry underground air. Even dead and dried, they're terrifying. 10 feet tall at the shoulder, built with muscle mass that seems impossible. The horns that crown their skulls are longer than your forearm. Their claws, still intact after 2 centuries, curve like scythes designed for a single purpose. These are first-generation Deathclaws. The original military prototypes before evolution and adaptation refined them further, but it's the last cell on the level that truly breaks your understanding of what's possible. This cell is larger than the others, reinforced to a degree that suggests whatever it held required extra precautions. The door is intact, but the viewing window has been shattered from inside. And within the cell, you find evidence that challenges everything you thought you knew. The walls are covered in scratches, but these aren't random. They're organized, patterns that repeat with too much precision to be accidental. Cole recognizes them first, his tracker's eye seeing what the rest of you miss. These are marks, he says, pointing to a series of grouped scratches. Like a calendar. Something was counting days in here. And these, he moves to another section. These are different. They're too regular, too intentional. Almost like language. Like something was trying to write, but didn't have the fine motor control to form proper letters. Vera approaches the wall, her hand hovering over the scratches without quite touching them. In some of the marks, you can see patterns that almost resemble words. Not English exactly, but phonetic approximations. One series of scratches, when you tilt your head and let your imagination fill in the gaps, might spell WHY. Another could be pain. A third, most disturbing of all, seems to read remember that the implications settle over the group like fallout. Something was held in this cell that had enough intelligence to mark time, to attempt communication, to express concepts that required abstract thinking. Something that wasn't human, but was trying desperately to bridge that gap. Webb's sensors alert him to movement again, closer this time. Whatever is on the lower levels knows you're here now. The question is whether they see you as intruders to be eliminated, or simply as curiosities to be observed. You make the decision to retreat. To level 3. To the research areas where at least you have sight lines and room to maneuver. As you climb the stairs, you can't shake the feeling that you're being watched. That somewhere in the darkness below, eyes are tracking your movement with patient interest. Back in the relative safety of the main research level, you gather around a laboratory bench, and begin sorting through the documents you've collected. The picture they paint is both clearer and more disturbing than you expected. The Deathclaw project wasn't just about creating bioweapons. It was about pushing the boundaries of what genetic engineering could achieve. Each generation of specimens was designed to be an improvement over the last, with enhancements that went far beyond simple physical attributes. One document details neural augmentation experiments, attempts to increase brain size and connectivity without sacrificing the aggression that made Deathclaws effective predators. Another discusses social bonding modifications, trying to make the creatures more willing to follow commands while maintaining enough independence to operate without constant supervision. A third, marked with security clearances that suggest even most facility personnel weren't allowed to read it, describes the introduction of FEV-derived compounds into the genetic sequence. That last revelation makes Webb's expression darken. The FEV connection. That explains so much. The forced evolutionary virus was the master's tool for creating super mutants, but before that, it was a military project. If they were using FEV-based genetic modification on the Deathclaws, they weren't just making them bigger and stronger. They were fundamentally altering their evolutionary potential. The pieces are falling into place now, forming a picture that's simultaneously fascinating and horrifying. The Deathclaws weren't designed to be controllable weapons. They were designed to evolve, to adapt, to become more than their creators intended. Someone in the military understood that the coming war would create a world where conventional soldiers couldn't survive. So they created something that could, something that would continue to improve with each passing generation until it became the perfect organism for a post-nuclear environment. The question that haunts you as you sit in the ruins of Site Omega is simple but profound. Did they succeed too well? Did they create something so perfectly adapted to survival that humanity itself became obsolete? From somewhere in the darkness below, you hear a sound that might be confirmation or might be warning. A low rumble that resonates through the facility's structure, felt as much as heard. Something vast moving through spaces built to contain it, reminding you that this place belongs to them now. Your expedition has only just begun. But already you understand that the truth about Deathclaws is darker and stranger than anyone imagined. The evidence scattered across Site Omega's research level seems to tell a complete story. Military scientists created biological weapons from Jackson's chameleons, enhanced them beyond reasonable limits, and lost control when the bombs fell. The specimens escaped during the chaos of nuclear war, spread across the wasteland, and evolved into the apex predators that now dominate the post-apocalyptic ecosystem. It's a neat narrative, one that explains the origins without requiring deeper conspiracy or hidden agendas. Webb seems satisfied with this explanation. He's been cataloging data for the Brotherhood, documenting equipment and research methodologies with the thoroughness his order demands. To him, this is exactly what it appears to be. A weapons project that succeeded too well and created consequences its designers never lived to see. The Brotherhood has encountered similar situations dozens of times. Pre-war technology that outlived its creators and became a threat to wasteland survivors. We have what we came for, he says, organizing files into his secure datapad. The origin story is clear. Military bioweapon program, genetic enhancement of reptilian species, catastrophic containment failure during the nuclear exchange. The Deathclaws are exactly what the documents say they are. Escaped military experiments that adapted to post-war conditions. But something nags at you, an inconsistency that you can't quite articulate. The explanation is too clean, too simple for a project this ambitious. You've spent enough time studying pre-war government operations to know they never did anything straightforward. There were always layers, always hidden objectives beneath the official ones. Cole shares your skepticism, though for different reasons. He's been examining the containment cells again, studying the damage patterns where the specimens escaped. His Wasteland tracker instincts are telling him something doesn't add up. Look at how these doors were breached, he says, gesturing to a cell where the reinforced barrier has been torn away. The metal is bent outward, which makes sense if something was breaking out. But look at the pattern of the damage. It's too precise, too controlled. When animals panic and try to escape, they attack randomly, using brute force without strategy. This is different. Whatever broke out of these cells understood the structural weak points. It knew where to apply force for maximum effect. Vera has found something that troubles her even more. She's discovered a secondary office, smaller than the main research areas, belonging to someone identified only as Dr. Chun, the same doctor. Chun, whose photograph Vera recognized from pre-war conferences. The office is remarkably preserved, perhaps because its door remained sealed until Vera managed to coax the electronic lock into opening. The space is intimate, personal in a way the sterile research labs aren't. Photographs on the desk show a young woman with kind eyes standing beside colleagues at various scientific gatherings. Books line one wall, not just technical manuals, but philosophy texts, ethics journals, works on consciousness and cognition. And on the desk, beneath a thin layer of dust, lies an open notebook filled with handwritten entries. Vera reads them aloud, her voice catching on certain passages. The entries start professional, clinical observations about specimen behavior and genetic modification results. But as the dates progress, the tone changes. Dr. Chun began to have doubts. March 15, 2077. Observed subject. Alpha 9 today during routine behavioral assessment. The subject was presented with a complex puzzle box containing food reward. Standard protocol to measure problem-solving capacity. What happened next was unexpected. The subject studied the box for nearly 10 minutes without attempting to open it. Then, with what I can only describe as deliberate precision, it solved the puzzle in under 30 seconds. But here's what troubles me. After retrieving the food, the subject reassembled the puzzle box. Not randomly, but correctly. It put the mechanism back together as if to demonstrate that it understood not just how to solve the problem, but how the problem itself worked. The entries continue, each one revealing more disturbing observations. Specimens communicating through sounds that approximated language structure. Younger specimens being taught by older ones, not through instinct, but through what appeared to be active instruction. Behavioral patterns that suggested not just intelligence but culture. The transmission of learned information across generations. June 3, 2077. Had a heated argument with Dr. Hawthorne today. I expressed concerns about the neural enhancement protocols. We've been so focused on whether we can increase their cognitive capacity that we've never seriously asked if we should. Hawthorne dismissed my concerns, said we're under orders from the highest levels of military command, that this project has implications beyond simple weapons development. When I pressed him on what that meant, he told me some things are classified above even our clearance level. But I've worked in black sites long enough to recognize when I'm being told that the truth is worse than I imagine. Webb stops his cataloging, attention drawn by Vera's reading. That suggests a deeper command structure, somewhat above the facility directors, above even the generals who officially oversaw the bioweapons program. He pulls up files on his datapad, cross-referencing security clearances and authorization codes. These experiments required resources and funding that would have drawn attention even in classified military budgets. Someone very high up was protecting this project, keeping it hidden from normal oversight. The implications begin to unravel, a neat explanation you'd almost accepted. If the Deathclaw project had protection at the highest levels of pre-war government, it wasn't just another weapons program. It was something more significant, more deliberately planned than simple military research. You find additional evidence in a secure, filing cabinet that Cole manages to force open. Inside are communication records, heavily redacted even in their original form. Most of the text has been blacked out, but fragments remain visible. References to something called the Continuity Protocol. Mentions of post-war survival scenarios. A memo discussing genetic insurance against total human extinction. One document, dated August 2077, is particularly revealing despite its redactions. It appears to be a debate between facility administrators about the project's true purpose. Dr. Hawthorne argues that they should focus purely on military applications, creating controllable bioweapons that can be deployed and then neutralized after use. But another voice, someone whose name has been completely redacted, argues for a different approach. The redacted official writes that humanity faces an existential threat from nuclear war. That survival of the human species cannot be guaranteed through traditional civil defense measures. That perhaps the answer isn't to save humanity as it currently exists, but to ensure something of human origin survives to inherit the post-war world. The language is chilling in its pragmatism. If we cannot survive the coming catastrophe, perhaps our legacy can be the creation of something that will. Vera's hands shake as she reads this. They knew. Some of them knew exactly what was going to happen. The nuclear war wasn't a possibility they were preparing for. It was a certainty they were accepting. And they decided to create a successor species. But Webb isn't convinced. His Brotherhood training makes him skeptical of conspiracy theories, preferring simpler explanations. This could be one administrator's personal philosophy, not official policy. We can't assume that everyone involved in the project shared these views. The evidence still supports the conclusion that this was primarily a military weapons program that had unforeseen consequences. The debate continues as you explore deeper into the facility's administrative sections. Each discovery seems to support both interpretations. Yes, there are documents about tactical deployment and combat effectiveness. But there are also research notes about long-term evolutionary potential and multi-generational adaptation strategies. The project appears to have had dual purposes, or perhaps competing visions among its leadership. In what must have been a conference room, you find a whiteboard that somehow survived 2 centuries. The writing has faded, but remains partially legible. Someone has drawn a timeline, starting in 2063 with project initiation and extending far beyond 2077. The timeline continues to 2087, 2097, 2107, projecting generations of specimen development. Beside each date are notes about expected evolutionary milestones. Enhanced pack coordination, development of proto-language, possible tool use, emergence of cultural transmission. This isn't a weapons development timeline, Cole observes. This is a species development plan. They were deliberately mapping out how these creatures would evolve over decades. That's not military thinking. That's something else entirely. Yet even this evidence can be interpreted differently. Webb suggests that perhaps the military was simply being thorough, planning for scenarios where the bioweapons might need to operate independently for extended periods. The timeline could represent contingency planning rather than intentional species design. The afternoon wears on as you continue exploring, and the simple story keeps fracturing into complexity. You find evidence of internal conflicts within the facility staff. Some researchers were clearly uncomfortable with the direction the project was taking. Others seemed almost zealous in their commitment to pushing boundaries. Emails between staff members revealed personality conflicts, ethical disagreements, and a growing sense among some that they were participating in something that would be judged harshly by history. One email exchange is particularly illuminating. A junior researcher questions the neural enhancement protocols, asking if creating intelligent bioweapons violates international law. The response from a senior administrator is brief and dismissive. International law, assumes there will be nations left to enforce it. Our work proceeds under different assumptions. As you piece together these fragments, a picture emerges that's more complex than simple military research, but less dramatic than deliberate species replacement. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. A weapons project that gradually evolved in scope as its participants realized the implications of what they were creating. Some embracing the darker possibilities, others trying to maintain ethical boundaries. All of them caught in the momentum of a program that had taken on a life of its own. Vera finds Dr. Chung's final journal entry, dated October 22, 2077, the day before the bombs fell. Her voice is barely above a whisper as she reads, "Tomorrow might be our last day. The intelligence reports are clear even if the public doesn't know yet. Nuclear war is imminent. I've made my peace with that, but I can't make peace with what we've done here. We created life, intelligent life, and we created it to kill. The subjects in the containment cells below, they're not weapons anymore. They're beings. They think, they feel, they understand their captivity. Subject Omega Prime has been communicating with us for weeks now, using the limited tools we've given it. It draws pictures. It solves complex mathematical puzzles. Yesterday, it looked at me through the observation window, and I swear it was trying to tell me something. Trying to make me understand. If the bombs fall tomorrow, if the facility loses containment, these creatures will be free. And I don't know if that terrifies me or gives me hope. Perhaps they'll do better than we did. Perhaps they deserve the chance. The journal entry ends there. You'll never know if Dr. Chun survived the initial blast or died in the chaos that followed. But her words linger, casting everything you've discovered in a different light. Webb remains unconvinced of any grand conspiracy. The evidence supports a military bioweapons program that had ethical critics among its staff. Nothing more. The fact that some researchers had philosophical concerns doesn't change the fundamental nature of what was being done here. They were creating weapons. The weapons escaped. Now we deal with the consequences, but you're not so sure. The timeline projecting decades into the future. The references to post-war survival scenarios. The debate about humanity's legacy. These aren't the concerns of people simply building better tools for war. These are the considerations of people who believed they were making choices that would echo across centuries. Cole brings practical concerns back to the forefront. While you've been debating motivations and evidence, he's been monitoring the lower levels. The movement signatures Webb's armor detected earlier have increased. Whatever is down there is becoming more active, possibly responding to your presence. He suggests you've gathered enough information and should consider leaving before the situation becomes dangerous, yet you're torn. The deepest levels remain unexplored. Level 5 and 6, where the map suggested special specimens were held, where Omega Prime itself might have been contained. The answers you seek might be in the darkness below, but reaching them means venturing into spaces with the current inhabitants. Clearly don't want intruders. Vera makes the decision for you. We leave, not because we have all the answers, but because we're asking the wrong questions. The truth about why they created Deathclaws might be knowable, but the truth about what Deathclaws have become that requires us to see them in the world, not in the tomb where they were born. The wisdom in her words is undeniable. You've learned the origins, traced the genetic engineering, documented the ethical conflicts. But understanding Deathclaws only through the lens of their creation is like understanding humans only through the lens of evolution. The story of what they were designed to be matters less than the story of what they chose to become. As you prepare to leave Site Omega, Webb makes one final discovery. Behind a locked cabinet in the security office, he finds deployment orders dated October 1st, 2077. Plans for using Deathclaw specimens in active combat zones. But the orders contain a curious addendum. one that seems to contradict the entire purpose of deploying bioweapons. After successful completion of combat objectives, specimens are to be released into local ecosystem rather than recovered or terminated. Reasoning is classified above current security clearance. The implications are staggering. Even before the bombs fell, someone planned to let these creatures loose in the world. The nuclear war didn't create an accidental containment failure. It accelerated a plan that was already in motion. But Webb cautions against reading too much into a single document. Military orders often contain contingencies that never get implemented. This could have been one option among many, not a definite intention. You gather your findings, secure what documentation can be carried, and begin the ascent back to the surface. The facility seems different now, less a tomb and more a birthplace. The darkness below holds secrets still, but you've learned enough to understand that the simple story, the comfortable explanation, is inadequate. The truth about Deathclaws is layered with complexity, human ambition, ethical compromise, and perhaps design that extended far beyond what anyone wants to acknowledge. As you emerge back into the desert sunlight, blinking against the brightness after hours underground, you hear it again. That rumbling sound from the depths. But this time, it's different. This time, it almost sounds like language. Syllables too low and guttural for human ears to fully process, but structured nonetheless. Something in the darkness is speaking, and you wonder if it's cursing you for the intrusion, or thanking you for bearing witness to where it all began. The wasteland stretches before you, vast and unforgiving as always. But now you see it differently. Every Deathclaw track, every territorial marker, every distant roar carries new meaning. These aren't just animals. They're not even just escaped bioweapons. They're the inheritors of a legacy written in genetic code by scientists, who may have understood exactly what they were creating. The question of whether they were right to do it remains unanswered. Perhaps it always will be. The journey from Site Omega takes you west, toward what pre-war maps identify as the Mariposa military base. If Site Omega was where Deathclaws were conceived and born, then Mariposa represents the next chapter in their evolution. This is where the forced evolutionary virus was developed, where the master conducted his experiments in the decades following the Great War, and where the boundary between intentional design and accidental mutation became irreversibly blurred. The landscape changes as you travel. The desert gives way to rocky terrain, scarred by pre-war military exercises and post-war battles. You pass through the remains of what must have been a significant engagement, the ground littered with the rusted hulks of power armor frames and the massive craters left by mini-nukes. Cole estimates the battle happened 60 or 70 years ago. Judging by the weathering patterns and the types of weapons residue he finds, whoever fought here lost badly. He observes, examining a power armor helmet that's been torn completely in half. The metal is scored with claw marks, deep gouges that penetrated the armor, plating like it was cloth. He holds up the helmet so you can see inside, where biological staining still remains after decades of exposure. Whatever killed the soldier wearing this didn't just breach the armor. It reached inside. Webb's expression behind his own helmet visor is grim. Brotherhood forces engaged Deathclaws in this region during our early expansion operations. We lost 3 full squads before we understood how to fight them effectively. Even now, with better tactics and weapons, our casualty rates in Deathclaw territory are higher than anywhere else in the Wasteland. The group makes camp that evening in the shell of a pre-war bunker, something civilian rather than military, based on the equipment remains. Vera builds a fire using furniture that's been dried by decades of desert air, and you gather around the flames as the wasteland temperature plummets with the setting sun. The conversation turns to what you discovered at Site Omega, and more importantly, what it means for understanding Deathclaws as they exist now. The specimens that escaped in 2077 were first generation. Vera says, warming her hands against the fire. Military prototypes, impressive but still within the parameters of what their creators intended. But 200 years have passed since then. That's potentially dozens of generations, depending on their breeding cycles. Whatever they are now, they've had centuries to evolve beyond their original design. Webb pulls up data on his terminal, information the Brotherhood has collected from encounters across multiple regions. Our records show significant variation between Deathclaw populations in different areas. Capital Wasteland specimens tend to be larger and more heavily armored. Mojave populations show increased pack coordination and tactical thinking. Commonwealth Deathclaws have developed subspecies we've never seen elsewhere. Chameleon variants with active camouflage. Glowing variants that emit lethal radiation. It's like watching accelerated evolution in real time. Cole adds his observations from years of tracking. They're adapting to local conditions faster than natural selection should allow. I've documented cases where behavioral changes appear within a single generation. A pack that learns a new hunting technique will teach it to their young, and within a year, that technique has spread to neighboring packs. That's not genetic evolution. That's cultural transmission. That's intelligence. The fire crackles, sending sparks into the darkening sky. Above you, stars emerge with the clarity only possible in places far from human-like pollution. The wasteland night is beautiful in its own harsh way. And sitting here with your companions, you feel the weight of what you're uncovering. The story of Deathclaws isn't just about pre-war hubris or post-war survival. It's about the emergence of something genuinely new in the world. A species that's writing its own story, independent of human intention. That morning comes with the peculiar stillness that precedes wasteland storms. The air feels charged, heavy with potential energy. Cole scouts ahead while the rest of you break camp, and when he returns, his expression suggests he's found something significant. There's a settlement about 5 miles north, he reports. Small, maybe 20 people. They've built inside an old factory complex, good defensive position. But more interesting is what they've got inside the walls. He pauses, as if uncertain whether to believe his own eyes. They've got a Deathclaw, a live one, in a cage. The statement seems impossible. Deathclaws can't be captured and held, not by a small wasteland settlement with limited resources. The strength required to contain such a creature, the constant danger of escape, the sheer foolishness of keeping apex predator in proximity to vulnerable humans. Yet Cole insists on what he saw, and his tracker instincts have never been wrong before. You approach the settlement cautiously, with Webb's power armor leading and weapons ready for potential hostility. Wasteland communities are often suspicious of strangers, and ones crazy enough to cage Deathclaws are likely to be more paranoid than most. But the settlement's guards, when they appear on the walls, seem almost relieved to see other people. Their leader, a weathered woman who introduces herself as Elder Patricia, invites your group inside with a desperation that suggests they need help badly. The settlement is well constructed, showing the kind of attention to detail that comes from people who know they're living on the edge of something dangerous. Reinforced walls, multiple escape routes, weapons positioned at strategic intervals. But what draws your attention immediately is the massive cage in the settlement's center. And inside it, as Cole reported, a Deathclaw. The creature is huge even by Deathclaw standards, easily 10 feet tall with muscle mass that suggests incredible power. Its hide bears the scars of many fights, old wounds that healed into patterns of toughened tissue. The horns crowning its skull are massive, curved like weapons designed by some ancient war god. But what strikes you most is its eyes. Intelligent, aware, tracking your group's movement with an assessment that feels almost human in its calculation. Elder Patricia explains the situation with the weariness of someone who's been carrying an impossible burden. We found it 3 months ago, injured badly by something we never saw. Probably another Deathclaw. Territorial dispute, maybe. It was dying. We should have left it. I know that. But my daughter, she's always had a soft spot for wounded things. She convinced us to help it, to bring it inside the walls and treat its injuries. The story sounds insane, but Patricia continues. We didn't expect it to survive. The wounds were too severe. Infection had set in. But my daughter, she worked on it for weeks. Used every bit of medical knowledge we had. Traded precious supplies for antibiotics from passing caravans. And somehow, impossibly, the creature recovered. Vera approaches the cage carefully, studying the Deathclaw with a clinical eye that comes from decades of scientific observation. The creature watches her back, its head tilting slightly, as if curious about the ancient ghoul examining it. What happened when it recovered? Why didn't you release it? Patricia's expression becomes complicated, mixing fear with something that might be wonder. We tried. We opened the cage, gave it clear path to the wastes. It didn't leave. It just sat there, watching us. My daughter, she started bringing it food, talking to it while it ate. And I swear on everything that matters, the thing started responding. Not with words, obviously, but with sounds, gestures, body language. It was communicating. Webb's skepticism is palpable even through his armor. Deathclaws are predators. Highly effective ones. They don't form bonds with humans. The biological programming wouldn't allow it. But Patricia shakes her head. I would have said the same thing 3 months ago. But watch this. She calls out to her daughter, a young woman in her early 20s who emerges from one of the settlement buildings. The daughter, introduced as Sarah, approaches the cage without visible fear. She carries a bucket of what looks like radstag meat, fresh and bloody. Sarah speaks to the Deathclaw in a calm, conversational tone. Good morning. I brought breakfast. Hope you're hungry. The creature responds with a low rumble, not aggressive, but almost greeting-like. Sarah opens a feeding slot in the cage and places the meat inside. The Deathclaw doesn't lunge or attack. It waits until she's closed the slot and stepped back before approaching the food god. As it eats, Sarah continues talking. The Deathclaw's head turns slightly toward her voice, and its eating pace slows as if it's listening. When Sarah asks a question, even something simple like "was that good?" the creature makes a sound that's distinctly different from its other vocalizations. It's answering in its own way. Cole is fascinated, his tracker instincts recognizing behavior he's never seen before. This goes against everything I know about Deathclaw behavior patterns. They're territorial, aggressive, driven by predatory instincts. What I'm seeing here shouldn't be possible, yet it clearly is. Over the next hour, Sarah demonstrates what she's learned about communicating with the creature. Different sounds mean different things. A low rumble indicates contentment. A sharp bark means alert or warning. A series of clicks seems to be curiosity or questioning. It's primitive compared to human language, but it's structured. It's communication. Vera pulls Sarah aside for a private conversation, and when they return, Vera's ancient face carries an expression of stunned realization. Sarah has been teaching it. Not just basic commands, but concepts. She's shown it pictures, taught it to recognize symbols. Yesterday, she drew a circle in the dirt and said the word for circle repeatedly. Today, when she drew the same shape, the creature made a sound that approximated the word. It's learning language. The implications crash over your group like a tidal wave. If one Deathclaw can learn to communicate, can form bonds with humans, can be taught abstract concepts, then everything you thought you understood about their capabilities needs revision. These aren't just animals operating on instinct. They're beings with the potential for genuine intelligence, perhaps even sapience. Webb struggles with this. his brotherhood training warring with the evidence before his eyes. The records don't mention anything like this. Deathclaws are classified as extremely dangerous fauna, not as potentially intelligent species. If what we're seeing is replicable, if other specimens can develop similar capabilities, then the entire approach to dealing with them needs reassessment. But Elder Patricia brings up the darker side of their discovery. That's why we needed help. Word has spread about what we've done here. Some Wasteland communities see it as proof that Deathclaws can be tamed, turned into weapons or guards. Others see it as an abomination, playing with forces we don't understand. We've had raiders try to steal it, Brotherhood scouts asking questions we don't want to answer. And worse, she leads you to the settlement's wall, pointing out across the wasteland to a ridgeline about half a mile distant. 3 days ago, another Deathclaw appeared there. It hasn't attacked, hasn't left. It just watches. We think it's from the same pack as our captive. Maybe its mate, maybe its offspring. It knows one of its own is here, and it's waiting. Cole examines the distant figure through his rifle scope. It's a female, he says. Mature, probably the alpha of her pack. If the one you have is her mate or one of her young, she won't leave. She'll wait for an opportunity to either rescue it or determine if it's a threat to the pack. The situation is impossibly complex. A settlement that's formed a bond with a creature that shouldn't be capable of bonding. A wild Deathclaw maintaining vigil over its captured packmate. The potential for violence hangs over everything like fallout waiting to settle. Yet there's also something profound happening here. Something that challenges the fundamental understanding of what Deathclaws are and can become. You spend 2 days at the settlement, documenting everything. Sarah's communication techniques, the Deathclaw's responses, and apparent comprehension. The behaviors that suggest genuine emotional bonds rather than simple conditioning. Vera conducts what observations she can without proper equipment. But her pre-war scientific training allows her to recognize that you're witnessing something unprecedented. On the second night, as you sit watch near the cage, the captive Deathclaw does something extraordinary. It moves to the side of the cage closest to where the wild female maintains her distant vigil. Then it begins making sounds, low rumbles and clicks that carry across the wasteland in patterns too structured to be random. It's calling to her. And after a moment, you hear a response from the ridgeline. Different sounds, but equally structured. They're talking to each other. Sarah appears beside you, having heard the exchange. They do this every night. He calls to her, she answers. Sometimes it goes on for hours. I don't know what they're saying, but it means something. It's not just animal sounds. It's communication between beings that care about each other. The observation keeps you awake long after your watch ends. You lie in the settlement's guest quarters, listening to the distant calls and responses, and you realize that the simple story you left Site Omega with has already broken apart. Deathclaws aren't just escaped bioweapons that got lucky. They're not even just highly successful predators. There's something emerging, something becoming, and humanity has no framework for understanding what that means. Morning brings a decision point. Elder Patricia asks for your help in resolving the situation. We can't keep him forever. It's not right, and it's not sustainable. But we can't just release him and hope for the best. That female on the ridge, she might attack us the moment her mate is free. Or they might both leave peacefully. We don't know, and the uncertainty is killing us. Webb suggests the Brotherhood could take custody of the specimen, study it in controlled conditions. But Vera immediately objects. You'd turn it into a laboratory subject, try to weaponize what it represents. That's exactly the kind of thinking that created them in the first place. Cole proposes a different approach. Release it at night when the settlement is locked down tight. Give it and the female a chance to reunite and leave peacefully. If they attack, we defend. But we give them the choice first. The debate continues, but ultimately Elder Patricia makes the call. Tonight, we open the cage and see what happens. Whatever comes, at least we'll have tried to do right by a creature that could have killed us all, but chose not to dot as evening approaches. The settlement prepares. Guards are posted, weapons loaded, escape routes confirmed. Sarah spends a final hour with the Deathclaw, explaining in her simple vocabulary what's going to happen. You watch the creature's reactions and wonder how much it truly understands. Does it know it's about to be freed? Does it comprehend that humans are choosing to help it rather than use it? The sun sets in brilliant colors, and darkness settles over the wasteland. The distant figure on the ridgeline becomes a shadow among shadows. And in the settlement center, Elder Patricia opens the cage door with hands that shake despite her resolve. The Deathclaw emerges slowly, as if uncertain this isn't a trick. It towers over the assembled humans, its physical power undeniable. One swipe of those claws could kill any of you. For a long moment, nothing happens. The creature simply stands there, free but not leaving, looking at the humans who saved its life and then kept it prisoner and are now releasing it. Then Sarah steps forward, unarmed and vulnerable. She speaks in that calm tone she's used for months. Go home, your family is waiting. Be safe. The Deathclaw looks at her. Really looks, with eyes that hold something you can't quite name. Then it turns and begins walking toward the settlement gate. The guards open it, weapons ready but not aimed. The creature passes through and out into the wasteland beyond. From the ridgeline, the female Deathclaw rises and begins descending. The two creatures meet in the space between the settlement and the wastes. They circle each other, making sounds of recognition and reunion. Then together, they turn and walk away into the darkness. They don't look back. Sarah is crying, though she tries to hide it. Elder Patricia puts an arm around her daughter's shoulders. You did a good thing. You proved something important, that they're more than just monsters. But as you watch the two Deathclaws disappear into the night, you wonder what exactly has been proven. That Deathclaws can learn? That they can bond? That they're intelligent enough to remember kindness and choose peace over violence? Or something even more profound and unsettling? That humanity's greatest creation has evolved beyond the need for human approval, human understanding, or human control. That they're becoming something independent, something new, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop or guide that emergence. The wasteland holds its secrets close, and tonight it's gained one more. The journey to Mariposa Military Base takes another 3 days through terrain that grows increasingly hostile with each mile. You're entering the heart of what Wastelanders call the Dead Zone, a region so saturated with residual Phi-V contamination that even 2 centuries later, the mutation rates are catastrophically high. The very air seems thick here, harder to breathe, and your Geiger counter maintains a steady rhythm that speaks of radiation levels that would kill an unprotected human within hours. Webb's power armor filters protect him, but the rest of you rely on Rad-X and Radaway, precious resources that you're burning through faster than anticipated. Vera seems least affected, her ghoulified physiology having long ago adapted to radiation levels that would be lethal to baseline humans. She moves through this poisoned landscape with the ease of someone walking through their own backyard, which in a sense she is. This is her world now, has been for 200 years. The base itself rises from the contaminated earth like a monument to pre-war military ambition. Most of the surface structures are ruins, collapsed or melted by nuclear fire. But the entrance to the underground complex remains intact. A massive blast door, similar to the one at Site Omega, but larger, more heavily reinforced. This facility was designed to withstand direct hits from nuclear weapons, and it succeeded. What it couldn't withstand was what happened inside after the bombs fell. Cole scouts the perimeter while you study the entrance, and what he finds is troubling. Deathclaw signs everywhere, but different from what you've seen before. The tracks are larger, the claw marks deeper. More concerning are the mutations evident in the prints themselves. Some tracks show evidence of additional digits. Others display size variations that suggest rapid evolutionary changes. Whatever Deathclaws live in this region, they've been affected by the concentrated FEV that saturates the environment. This is where it happened, Vera says quietly. Where the master conducted his experiments. Where the vault dweller ended his plans. The FEV vats were destroyed, but you can't destroy something like that cleanly. It leaked into the groundwater, dispersed through the ventilation systems, contaminated every surface. Any creature living near Mariposa has been exposed to trace amounts of FEV for generations. Webb consults his datapad, pulling up Brotherhood records from the decades following the Master's defeat. Our scribes documented mutations in local wildlife as early as 2163. Within 20 years of the Vat's destruction, they were seeing creatures that shouldn't exist. Super mutants who'd been nowhere near the Master's army. Animals with impossible physiologies. And Deathclaws that were larger, more aggressive, more intelligent than specimens documented elsewhere. The implications are staggering. If Deathclaws in this region had been subjected to generations of low-level FEV exposure on top of their already engineered genetics, they represent something beyond what was created at Site Omega. They're the next stage of evolution, accelerated by the very substance that created super mutants. Gaining entry to Mariposa proves easier than expected. The blast door's mechanisms were damaged during the Vault Dweller's assault, and someone, probably salvagers or Brotherhood scouts, has jury-rigged a manual override. The door grinds open with the protest of metal that hasn't moved in decades. Revealing darkness beyond that, feels almost alive in its intensity. The facility's interior is a nightmare, landscape of post-war devastation and biological horror. The walls are covered in organic growth, something that might be fungus or might be mutated tissue, pulsing with a faint bioluminescence that provides minimal light. The air is thick with spores or maybe viral particles, making even filtered breathing uncomfortable. This place feels wrong at a fundamental level, as if reality itself has been damaged by what occurred here. You descend through levels that tell the story of the Masters, ambitions, and the Vault Dweller's desperate mission to stop him. Here is where the FEV vats once stood, massive containers now shattered and empty, but still radiating mutagenic energy that makes your Geiger counter scream. Here is where super mutants were created, turned from humans into something else through forced viral transformation. And here, in the deeper levels you discover, is where Deathclaws were brought and exposed to FEV in experiments. That went beyond anything attempted at site. Omega.Vera finds research notes in a laboratory that somehow remain sealed from the worst contamination. The documents are later than the pre-war material, dated to the 2150s and signed by scientists working under the Master's direction. Their research focused on combining the engineered genetics of military Deathclaws with the transformative properties of FEV. The Master believed he could create a perfect warrior caste. Vera reads from one document. He'd already transformed humans into super mutants, but they lacked certain qualities he desired. The intelligence was there, the strength was there, but the predatory instinct was absent. Super mutants were designed to think and plan, but they weren't natural killers. Deathclaws, on the other hand, were perfect predators, but lacked the cognitive capacity for complex strategy. He hypothesized that combining the two through controlled FEV exposure would create something unprecedented. The experiments apparently failed, at least by the Master's standards. The resulting specimens were too aggressive to control, too independent to accept direction. Many killed themselves trying to escape. Others turned on the super mutant handlers with a fury that suggested the FEV had enhanced not just their physical capabilities, but their hatred of captivity. The master eventually abandoned the project, focusing instead on his plans for forced human evolution. But the specimens that escaped during the facility's destruction didn't disappear. They survived in the wastes around Mariposa, breeding and passing on their enhanced traits. What you're seeing now, 2 centuries later, are the descendants of those failed experiments. Deathclaws with FEV-enhanced genetics, evolving in an environment saturated with the very substance that made them what they are. Cole discovers evidence of more recent activity in the facility. Camps where humans have temporarily sheltered, equipment suggesting scientific study rather than simple salvage. Someone has been coming here regularly, documenting the mutations, studying the effects of long-term FEV exposure. The camps are well supplied, organized, bearing symbols that Webb immediately recognizes. Enclave, he says, his voice tight with anger. They've been conducting research here. Recently, too, within the last few months. He examines a portable computer terminal left behind, its data core thankfully intact. When he connects it to his armor systems and begins extracting information, his expression grows darker. They're cataloging Deathclaw evolution, tracking mutation rates, documenting behavioral changes. This isn't casual observation. This is systematic research with a specific goal. The data Webb recovers paints a disturbing picture. The Enclave has been monitoring Mariposa region Deathclaws for years, watching how FEV exposure affects their development across generations. More concerning are the notes about specimens being captured, studied, and then released with tracking devices. The Enclave isn't just observing. They're experimenting, using the Wasteland as a laboratory and Deathclaws as unwitting test subjects. One file stands out, marked with the highest security classification. It details something called Project Renaissance, an Enclave initiative begun in the 2230s. The goal, as stated in the documents, is to perfect the process of guided evolution. Where the master failed through crude viral transformation, the Enclave believes they can succeed through careful genetic manipulation and selective breeding programs. Veer reads through the files with growing horror. They're trying to do what the pre-war military did, but with the benefit of 200 years of data. They're not creating new Deathclaws. They're guiding the evolution of existing ones, pushing them toward specific traits: intelligence, obedience, the ability to follow complex orders. They're trying to create the perfect soldier, just like the original project intended. But there's more. Deeper in the files, you find evidence that the Enclave's ambitions extend beyond simple bioweapons. They're interested in the emergent intelligence you witnessed at the settlement. They've documented cases of Deathclaws exhibiting problem-solving abilities, social cooperation, even proto-linguistic communication. And rather than being alarmed by these developments, they're fascinated. They see potential. One memo, written by someone identified only as Chief Researcher Autumn, proposes something radical. If Deathclaw intelligence can be enhanced to human levels while maintaining their physical superiority, they could represent a successor species to humanity. In the event that human population recovery proves impossible, a guided evolution of Deathclaws into sapient beings could preserve Earth's dominant intelligence. They would be, in essence, humanity's children. Our legacy in a world we can no longer survive in. The philosophy is chillingly similar to what you found hinted at in Site Omega's documents. The idea that humanity's greatest achievement might be creating something to replace us. But here, it's not vague speculation. It's active policy, backed by decades of research and experimentation. Webb's reaction is immediate and visceral. This is an abomination. The Enclave is playing God with forces they don't understand. Creating intelligent Deathclaws doesn't preserve humanity. It erases us. We'd be engineering our own extinction. But Vera, poses a question that silences the group. What if humanity is already functionally extinct? We number in the thousands, spread across a poisoned continent. Genetic diversity is minimal. Most children born in the Wasteland don't survive to adulthood. Radiation-induced mutations are increasing with each generation. What if the Enclave is right? What if the only way for something of Earth's intelligence to survive is through a species better adapted to post-nuclear conditions? The moral and philosophical implications are overwhelming. You sit in the ruins of the Master's laboratory, surrounded by evidence of 2 centuries of attempted directed evolution, and you grapple with questions that have no easy answers. Is it wrong to create a successor species if your own is dying? Does humanity have the right to determine what comes after us? And most troubling of all, what if the Deathclaws are already on this path naturally, with or without human intervention? Cole brings the discussion back to practical matters. If the Enclave is actively experimenting on Deathclaws, we need to know what they've accomplished. The documents mention a primary research facility somewhere in this region. We should find it. The search takes you deeper into Mariposa's bowels, through levels that even Brotherhood scouts haven't fully explored. You pass through chambers where super mutants once lived, their crude attempts at civilization still evident in salvaged furniture and wall decorations. You navigate around areas where contamination is so concentrated that even brief exposure would trigger immediate mutation. In the deepest accessible level, you find what you're looking for. A sealed chamber, the door marked with Enclave insignia and recent security codes. Webb's technical expertise allows him to bypass the locks, and what's revealed beyond is a fully functional modern laboratory. Powered by a portable fusion generator stocked with equipment that wouldn't look out of place in a pre-war research institute, the lab is empty of personnel but full of data. Computers running analysis programs on genetic sequences. Tanks containing tissue samples from dozens of different Deathclaw specimens. Video recordings of behavioral tests and cognitive assessments. This is where the Enclave's current research is being conducted, and the scope of it is breathtaking. Vera accesses one of the computer terminals, her pre-war scientific background allowing her to navigate the research protocols with ease. What she finds makes her hands shake. They've succeeded. The Enclave has successfully enhanced Deathclaw intelligence through targeted genetic modification. The files document a breeding program that's been running for over a decade, selecting for traits that promote cognitive development while maintaining physical capabilities. The crown jewel of the research is a video file dated just 3 months ago. It shows a Deathclaw in a testing chamber, presented with a series of increasingly complex puzzles. The creature solves them all with a speed and understanding that suggests genuine comprehension. Then the researcher, visible only as a voice through speakers, asks the Deathclaw a question using a simplified symbolic language. The creature has apparently been taught. Do you understand what you are? The Deathclaw manipulates a series of symbols in response. The translation, provided by the computer interface, reads yes. Do you want to be free? Again, symbol manipulation. Yes. What would you do with freedom? The Deathclaw pauses for a long moment, then creates a symbol sequence that translates as learn, grow, teach others. The implications crash over you like the blast wave from a nuclear detonation. The Enclave hasn't just created intelligent Deathclaws. They've created self-aware ones, beings that understand their own existence, that plan for their future, that want to spread knowledge to their own kind. This isn't a weapon anymore. This is a person, or something close enough that the distinction becomes meaningless. Webb's voice is barely controlled. Where is this specimen? Where are they keeping it? The files provide an answer that makes your blood run cold. The enhanced specimen was released 6 weeks ago into the wild population. The Enclave wanted to see if it would teach other Deathclaws. If intelligence could spread through social learning, the way the creature itself suggested it wanted to do. They've weaponized sapience, Cole says quietly. Released a teacher into a population of students who have the biological capacity to learn, but lacked a guide. If it works, if this one enhanced Deathclaw can elevate the intelligence of its entire pack, and those pack members spread to other packs, you're looking at exponential growth in Deathclaw cognitive capacity across the entire species. The research files confirm Cole's assessment. The Enclave is tracking the released specimen through subcutaneous implants. They're monitoring its interactions with wild Deathclaws, documenting behavioral changes in the populations it contacts. And the preliminary results are everything they hoped for. Pack coordination has improved dramatically. Hunting strategies show signs of abstract planning. Territorial behaviors suggest the beginning of property concepts and resource. Management.Vera finds one final document that crystallizes everything you've discovered. It's a progress report to someone identified as High Command, summarizing the Renaissance Project's achievements and future objectives. The language is clinical, detached, but the content is revolutionary. We have successfully demonstrated that Deathclaw intelligence can be enhanced to near-human levels through targeted genetic intervention. More significantly, we have confirmed that this intelligence is socially transmissible through teaching and cultural learning. Subject Prime has integrated with a wild pack and is actively educating pack members in complex concepts including tool use, strategic planning, and symbolic communication. We project that within 3 generations, the enhanced pack will have developed a primitive but functional language. Within 5 generations, they may achieve technological capability comparable to early human civilization. The question is no longer whether Deathclaws can become sapient, but how quickly this process will occur and whether it can be guided to produce outcomes favorable to Enclave interests. The report concludes with a recommendation that chills you. We should accelerate the program by releasing additional enhanced specimens into geographically diverse populations. Creating multiple centers of cognitive development will increase the likelihood of successful species-wide intelligence emergence. If Enclave objectives include long-term survival of human genetic legacy in any form, supporting Deathclaw evolution towards sapience may be our most viable strategy. You look at your companions, seeing your own shock and confusion reflected in their faces. Everything you thought you were investigating, the origins and evolution of Deathclaws, has revealed itself to be something far larger and more consequential. You're not just documenting the past. You're witnessing the active engineering of the future. A future where humanity's role is uncertain at best, extinct at worst, and where the inheritors of Earth might be the very creatures humanity created as weapons. The wasteland above continues its slow rotation toward night, indifferent to the revelations occurring in the depths below. But for you and your companions, the world has fundamentally changed. The question is no longer where Deathclaws came from, or how they evolved. The question is what happens next, and whether anyone has the right or the power to influence the answer out in the darkness of Mariposa Military Base. Surrounded by evidence of humanity's greatest hubris and perhaps its final legacy, you understand that some experiments don't end. They simply continue evolving long after their creators are gone.